William Gibson once said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." The time has come to draw attention to science fiction stories written all over the planet. Stories made of different languages, colors, shapes, hopes and beliefs. The future happens everywhere. That's why we are here.
Well, hello everyone, wherever in the world you are. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the second panel of FutureCon 2021. My name is César Santivañez and I'm from Lima, Peru. I'm a sci-fi writer and scriptwriter. And for the next hour and a half, we hope I'll be your host in this amazing conversation. So today we have a great topic. It's called, as you may know, is the future a Western idea? How language shapes the future. And to discuss it, we have very great guests who I'm sure will give us some exciting perspectives about the subject. So I'll let our panelists introduce themselves so we can know a little more about them. Maybe they could share with us some words about your expectations about this panel, if you like, of course. So first of all, I'd like to welcome David Bowles from the United States. David, please welcome.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is David Bowles. I'm a Mexican-American author and translator from Deep South Texas. I live in a transnational community on the border between the U.S. and Mexico. I'm a writer of speculative fiction, mainly for young people, for adolescents. So I dabble in science fiction and fantasy. In addition to speaking English and Spanish, I also am a professor of the indigenous language Nahuatl. And so that perspective, that linguistic perspective, informs a lot of the speculative work that I do.
Thank you, David. Thank you with being with us today. We also have Eliana González. She's a writer from Paraguay. Welcome, Eliana. You can share with us a little bit about you and your work.
Hello, everyone. I'm from Asunción, Paraguay, and right now I'm the co-editor of Constelación magazine, which is a bilingual speculative fiction magazine that we began last year. I also write short stories. I also write screenplays, actually. And yeah, I'm super excited about this because I think the topic is one that it goes along with the many questions I always have about language and my own perception of English and Spanish and how I navigate those two worlds. So really looking forward to it.
Thanks, Eliana. Well, Malka has just entered the room. Malka, please tell us a little bit about you.
Yes, sorry I was a few minutes late. My name is Malka Older. I'm the author of Infomocracy and the rest of the Sentinel Cycle trilogy, which are science fiction political thrillers, and also the collection And Other Disasters, which is short stories and poetry. And this is also something that I'm really excited to talk about because language is a big part of my life and what I do. And I feel like a lot of my work has been inspired by living in places that are not my own and speaking languages that are not the ones that I grew up in, and that feeling itself and also the perspective it gives me on the place where I did grow up. So it's really important to how I work and what I write about.
Oh, great, Michael. That's very interesting. We have also Uwe Post, a German writer, who's I must say, whose short story ide.com blew my mind when I first read it. You can check it out on his website. So Uwe, welcome. Please, your words.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As said, yeah, ide.com is one of my most famous short stories, and one of the rare ones which are also available in English, because I'm from Germany and I I tend to write in German. There's also a novel, E-Tod, which is actually based on that short story. And apart from writing novels and short stories in future fiction, I'm a software developer, and I also write programming books, for example. So yeah, very great to be here together with those colleagues from around the world.
Great, thanks, Uwe. And we have yet another great guest, Xia Jia. She's a Chinese sci-fi and fantasy writer, author of such great stories as Tong Tong Summer and 100 Ghost Parades Tonight. Welcome, Xia Jia.
Hi, thank you very much, and it's my honor to be here. I'm a Chinese writer, and also I majored in Chinese language and literature studies, and right now I'm teaching at Xi'an University, which is in a very beautiful historical city, Xi'an. I was born here, and right now I'm also based here. And I also do science fiction studies, generally speaking, it's about like a contemporary Chinese science fiction, how about the future imagination expressed in these narratives. So I'm also very happy to be here to talk about like the future conceptions in different languages. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Xia. In fact, I teach script writing for animation here in Peru. I was talking to you some minutes ago, and sometimes we use some extracts of 100 Ghost Parades Tonight as a class material from adaptation from literature through to animation. So there is a few storyboards drawn there. Well, I would like to start this conversation with a curious fact. As I mentioned, I live in Peru, and here we are Spanish speakers for the last 500 years or so. But the truth is that we are very young Spanish speakers, because before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors to the coast of the South America, we've been talking other language other than Spanish for the last 6,000 years or so. So we have a very great and heavy heritage from other language. In fact, if you come to Peru someday, which I wish, you can find 46 46 languages other than Spanish. And so it's a very wide range of language. And one of those languages is Quechua, the language spoken by the ancient Incas. And even now, when you talk about the future in Quechua, you use the term Quipapacha. And it's a very interesting term, even if it's very hard to translate, because it means the land behind us. Pacha means earth, but it also means time. So back then there was already a conception of space-time that we get to know centuries later. And Kipa means back. So the Quipapacha is the future, because for the ancient Incas, you walk to the future backward, because you can't see the future. It's something you cannot see. You can see our past, and it makes sense if you think about it, because we can predict the future, but we can analyze and the good and bad choices made by your ancestors and by yourself. So analyzing your own past and the decisions made by your ancestors, you can define your fate, your destiny. And when you talk about past in Quechua, you use the term ñaupa pacha. That is, ñaupa means eyes. So it's the time of the eyes and the times of the back. That's a little bit example. And just the terms Quipa Pacha and ñaupa pacha help to build this social construction politically and philosophy and all about the Inca Empire. So that being said, my first question to our guest would be, in your opinion, what is the relationship between language and future-based narrative? And if so, how do you treat the subject in your work? Maybe someone want to jump in?
You know, I was thinking as you were talking about the terms in Quechua, how, you know, the correspondences with the way to refer to the past and the future in Nahuatl, which was, you know, similarly to Quechua, like one of the major languages in Mesoamerica, what is now Mexico and Central America, being the language of the Aztecs and other Nahua groups. And it's still spoken to this day by nearly 2 million people, different modern varieties of it are. And at the time of the Spanish invasion, there were two. I mean, the main way to refer to both the past and the future was with the word huecan, and huecan meaning distant time or place, because time and place words are constructed the same way, and so you can refer to a time or a place, and you just clarify through context. So that the past is huecan no pampa, the distant time or place behind us, and the future is huecan Toshpan, the distant time or place in front of us. And I think that this kind of way of envisioning time as being, you know, either, you know, if you're thinking about from the Quechua perspective where you're walking backwards and you can't see the future and then it's behind you and the past is in front of you, or your orientation is the other way around, it's this notion that there's a continuity between past and future that flows through the speaker. And I think that helps to root a lot of indigenous futurism that I read, and like Latinx futurism more broadly in the US, when we think about how our speculation about the future is typically, or a lot of times we strive for it to be anchored in the past and the values and world vision of, you know, ancestors that you know lived very differently than we do, but whose values we're still trying to, you know, embody. And I think that, you know, the attempt to write about a future in which those values are projected forward in time is, you know, the work of a lot of indigenous futurism and Latinx futurism. And I know that in my own work, it's something that comes in a lot. And so I mean, the only differentiation I make between my, you know, like historical fiction or fantasy writing and futuristic writing or science fiction writing is just like, you know, the place and time that things are occurring, but like the values and the textures and like the cultural signposts along the way are similar and similarly grounded in the past.
Great. Who wants to talk now? Maybe Eliana or Malka.
Well, yeah, in that same vein, I relate to what David both said, because actually my first short story that I was published because I presented to a contest was about, you know, a future where this mother and daughter meet people that speak Guarani, like in a very unlikely place. And Guarani has survived as one of Paraguay's main languages because, well, it's an oral language. It didn't have a lot of like written tradition. So they say it was passed down from mother to children, right? And it has survived so long, I think in part because it is a language like of feelings. It's a very emotional language. I'm not fluent in it, so I can't really like be too specific about the differences between Guarani and Spanish. And one thing that I realize is that we do hold on to them. Like if I think of the future, if I think of stories in the future, I always think, so how will this language last? I mean, it has lasted for a really long time, in spite of being colonized or tried to take over by Spanish. It was also kind of banned for a while. Then it was used by a dictator, like to kind of like harbor these patriotic feelings towards Paraguay, and then it was suppressed again. Now it's official, and so it has gone through a lot of phases, but it has always lasted. So I can't imagine a future in which I write about Paraguay or my culture without something from Guarani. Because even if I'm not fluent in it, in Paraguay we speak something called Yopara, which is a mix of Guarani and Spanish. Like I actually speak it, like I could say something like, I don't know, Bateco la luz stop. So I speak the three languages almost interchangeably when I'm speaking with people who understand the three. So it's woven into our culture so much that all my stories and everything that I think about the future are always based on something related to that.
Thank you, Eliana. Uwe, maybe you have something to share with us on the subject.
Well, from the perspective of a German writer and reader, we have in the German language past tense, present tense, future tense, actually two syntactical forms of future tense language, but nobody would ever have the motivation to write a novel or short story in the future tense. Actually, it's the opposite way. Yeah, most novels are written in past tense, even if the action happens somewhere in the late future, in the far away future. It's written in past tense, and moreover, I tend to use present tense in some of my novels or short story, and many readers have quite some difficulties with reading a story in present tense. And so I would be very curious to hear from my colleagues in which syntactical time do you write most of your works?
Great, that's a very interesting fact. Malka, please, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about tense a bit as well, because I wrote my novels in present tense, which is I think not as unusual in English, but still somewhat unusual, and then caused me endless trouble when I was writing other things that were supposed to be in past tense and kept forgetting. But I wanted it to feel very urgent and to feel like a future that was unfolding in the moment. We could ask also why we don't write in the future tense, which of course there are occasional stories and very occasional novels that do, but it's really rare. Mostly, I think we want the readers to feel like they're in that future, as opposed to looking forward to it, which is an interesting aspect of this in terms of we're writing about the future, but we're usually writing it as a present, or sometimes even as a past. Sometimes we're far future looking back at the future of the story we're telling. But this sort of language specificity about what tenses are used. I mean, to take another example, French. Is the written French uses a tense that's almost never used in the spoken. So I can read French novels and I know what verb they're talking about, but if I had to construct a sentence using the passé simple in French, I wouldn't know how, because I only read it. I never hear people talking. I never use it myself. So languages can be really, really interesting how they work with tenses. The other thing I wanted to say, and this is drawing a little bit also on what Eliana was saying, is that one thing about writing in the future is if it's any kind of distant future, we're often asked about how language has changed in that point. And I think we're all familiar with a lot of works that do this in part by mixing lots of current languages and assuming that in this future, people like Eliana said, who will mix multiple languages that everyone in the surroundings, in the context, is familiar with. So they imagine, in the United States where people speak Spanglish all the time. But the other thing is too, we're often, I've done some design fiction work lately where I'm writing stories for organizations or companies that want to imagine specific things about the future. And they're always like, should we be inventing new words for X, Y, Z? And it's always an interesting problem, because we know language will evolve and we know there will be new words coming. And then we know there will be different aggregations of languages and the way they work together. But also, because we know this and because we know it'll change so much, you want to put some new things in so people can feel the newness, but also essentially we're always translating from this future world into our current language, because otherwise it's incomprehensible. So what we write is almost an assumed translation of the future language into our current day, whatever language we're writing in. And so there's that aspect too, I think, to what we're this sort of invisible bridge between what we're imagining and what we put on the page.
Great. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing to see how language is a live, ever-changing phenomenon. Xia Jia, what do you think? Do you think there's a relationship between language and future-based narratives?
Yeah, because I was have been stuck for a while and I lost a part of this conversation, but I learned that I already learned something about languages and in Spanish and other languages. But in China, first of all, the term future in Chinese sounds like 未来, which means not yet come. So you can use this term to describe something or somebody which is not yet coming. But right now we are using the term 未来 or future as a very, very modern conception, because in ancient China, we do not. Second thing is that there's no past tense and future tense in Chinese, so we cannot tell that something happened in which time unless we face that in a very special term. And in ancient China, people do not use this modern calendar. They use instead they have been using ancient Chinese calendar, and which is unique because there's no it's not linear, but like a circulation of the time. For example, 12 years can be a circulation. For example, this year is like the Course year. So 12 years later, there'll be another Course year. So ancient people do not think that there will be much differences between this Course year and the next Course year and the past Course year. But only since I think that since the end of the Qing dynasty, which is the very last dynasty in Chinese history, people began to change their mind and began to embrace a very new world, a very new concept of time, and they also began to adopted the Gregorian calendar, which is apparently a very linear concept of time. We use this time there's a zero, the very starting point of this time, and after that the time just adding, and we can imagine that everything will be changing year by year. So there used to be a very, very interesting case I want to share here, which is come from I think it can be counted as the very first Chinese science fiction published in 1902, and the author, he's a very famous intellectual. He wrote it. Yeah, he wrote that novel to try to describe the future of China. So the title of that novel is 新中国未来记, Future of a New China. So at the very beginning of that novel, the narrator told the audience that this story happens in the future, which is 1962, which is 60 years after the year the author published that novel. And so in that in the very beginning of that novel, there's a future narrator tells the audience, the readers, that right now I'm telling you about a future story, and I would show you how strong and prosperous China will be in 60 years, and furthermore, I will tell you that I will tell you the history of the past 60 years, how China became that prosperity. So that's a very, very modern way of using the concept of future, and kind of like a promise, because we are not just talking about like the normal future, but future is a promise that promised people that the future will be the nation state will be stronger and stronger in the future. The minds and the bodies of the civilization will be developed in the future, and this kind of future concepts have been impressing Chinese people for many years, even now. So right now, even now, we talk about future. It's still like a promise. Will that be a better future or a worse future? And which kind of things can we do to make this more willing future to be fulfilled? So I think such kind of
Oh, maybe we're having some troubles with connections. Okay. Well, I think in these words are also. Oh, sorry.
happening many.
Oh,
I think that, yeah, she's first.
Yeah. Well, she came back for sure. Well, I think these words can be also keys to understand things from a different point of view, like you all were saying. There's a word that it's Pachamama in Quechua, that's Mother Earth, and I love that word, and I think it has similar words in other indigenous language, because it can solve many of the problems we have today with the environment, with the climate. Because when you talk about the Pachamama, you talk about the Mother Earth, you're giving the Earth a human characteristic, and not just human, but you're transforming the Earth in your mother. And you have to be a very awful person to harm your mother, right? So this spiritual connection between the earth and with the moon and with the elements, I think they're a key fact to understand, and maybe to change the way we think today. Now I want to. There's another thing I'm very curious about, and I'd like to enter the field of subjectiveness here, and talk with you as readers, not only as writers. It happens to me that I read in English and Italian other than Spanish, and when I read in every one of the languages, I feel that there's a treatment not just of the future, but of time in general. When I read in Italian, it's very easy for me to get caught by the fluidly and the smoothly of the smoothness of the text. When I read in Spanish, I tend to focus more on the emotions of the characters, and when I read in English, I get impressed by the quality of making things feel realistic. They have a very strong descriptions in English. I love that characteristics in every one of the language. So I wanted to know if you can read or write in more than one language. Do you think the language has some effect on the subjectiveness of the reader?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. Similarly to you, when I read in different languages, whether when I'm reading in English or Spanish or Nahuatl or French or Italian or whatever language I happen to be reading in, the experience is different, and I'm focused on different things because, at least subjectively for me, the languages do different things for my enjoyment as a reader, and I'm hesitant to then turn those subjective experiences into kind of broad generalizations about language, because that happens a lot, with all the nonsense about, Italian is the language of lovers and da 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 da. But yeah, no, I mean, subjectively, it feels different. And reading in English and Spanish, which are my native languages, I experience things differently. The language is more transparent, and I'm like more like just thrust into the world. Although I think that with Spanish there is a little more, just because of how different literary Spanish is from like my native dialect of Spanish, because I come from a very rural area in deep South Texas. Sometimes I'm a little distracted by the elegance or the artificiality of some literary Spanish, which tends to be a little more conservative than English in the way it's written. But for the most part, those languages are pretty transparent to me, and I'm able just to be thrust into the story. But with other languages that are not my native language, I do a lot of times get really caught up and like going, oh wow, look at that interesting turn of phrase, or this is it's so fascinating the way, as Malka was talking about, French uses this particular past tense form that's not used in speech, and it's really really it's distracting, especially if you're a linguist. Thinking about it all the time. And yeah, when I'm reading in Nahuatl, which is a language I read a lot more slowly than other languages, usually I'm translating from it. I'm like just thinking about every word and every nuance and so forth. So yeah, the experience is different. And I think that's a valuable thing, because it feeds back into my own writing and makes me more conscious of my word choice, makes me, I think, construct language in ways that I wouldn't otherwise. If I were just a monolingual English speaker, I would probably write in a much less self-conscious way. Maybe I'm wrong, but I suspect that I would.
I agree with that so much, and I also find when I read in other languages, part of the pleasure that I get from reading is the sense of when I put together a word or phrase that maybe I wasn't super familiar with before. I see it used in a different way, and it's like a little star when my brain is like, oh, I figured something out. And I don't know if maybe that's coming from when I was a kid learning English, my native language, in that way, by reading lots of books that were way beyond my grade level, and like learning these words by context. But I really love that feeling. I love it whether I'm doing it in conversation, learning a language, or in a book. And in a book particularly, I think you can really savor like, oh, this is a construction of a sentence that I didn't know before, and look how neatly it works and expresses what it's trying to express. And I think that's such a great feeling. But as you said, that's very subjective. When you see a word that you don't know very well, and you're like, oh, this is a perfect word. And a native speaker or someone else who had a different path of learning the language, even reading it, would just be like, oh yeah, that's the word I would use. That's normal. So that's part of it. But I also think, we do see reading in different languages. I mean, there's a kind of overlap with that's somewhat subjective, but that we do see that languages in those constructions and in those, and the wonderful thing about languages, right, and that we have so many, is that they're all so weird, and they really show how humans can find all sorts of different paths to expressing the same thing. And so you do find, different languages that are able to express things. Just the constructions they put on it mean that you get a different view of what's being talked about. And so that I do think that there is that element that's both objective and subjective, because you might not notice it as a native speaker, depending on how common that construction is, but you might, and you can appreciate that this is a way of saying something that's different than other ways, and it's just so exciting.
Yeah. Uwe, what do you think about it?
Well, so as I'm mostly speaking, reading, and writing in German, of course, I can read and speak a little bit English and maybe a couple of words in other languages. Of course, I have a quite limited perspective, and this actually produces an interesting question, which is closely related to the title of our panel here: is the future a Western idea? I mean, I only know this from inside, so as I am a Western white man, yeah, and I grew up with reading, Jules Verne, yeah, who is also European Western writer, and And I think many readers here in Western Europe grew up with those novels, with those works, and I mean, this formed also the language we, as our current generation writers, use this language, like writing in past tense, using new words, which is actually, I wanted to point out that anyway. I mean, if you write your story in present or past tense, this is still on the timeline, not located in the future. To do this, you must bring the future world to the reader, and to come up with new words. So with neologisms, that's a very good way to do that, and that's why I always do this very much, so, very often. So that's probably a bad job, bad for any translator who tries to translate my work, because of those new words. So I'm very curious about how to hear how is this in the non-Western world.
Yeah.
So based on what David and Malka were saying, what happens to me is that I always try to read in the original language, but sometimes you can't. So I have to choose. Do I read this translation like French or German, in English or Spanish? And I usually go for English for the simple reason that the Spanish translations are all Spanish from Spain. And I know they're not Spanish from Spain. It's not, and that whole thing about neutral Spanish, that doesn't exist. So it throws me off because I know that it is translated in Spanish from Spain, and it's not the one that I usually speak. I understand. You can understand it perfectly, but it just feels so foreign in the sense that I can't get it out of my head that it's Spanish from Spain. So I usually tend to read translations in English. And it also happens to me, like my entire quest, language-wise, is to try to figure out how I combine these two languages and what they both mean to me. So I find it very interesting what they're saying, because it's the same thing for me. Like, I don't know. Sometimes I'm just in the mood to read Spanish because I want to read something that's, I mean, it's a little, I can even say it's a little bit harder for me to read in Spanish just because I'm not so familiar with it. Most of my education has been in English, and that's why I always say that English is like my academic language, whereas Spanish is like this language with my mother, with everyone here, obviously. So I have that kind of weird relationship between the two as well.
Great. And Xia Jia, what do you think? Do you think language has some effect on subjectiveness?
Yeah, because I just heard that somebody talked about like non-Western language. Because I speak Chinese and I've learned English, and also I have tried very hard to learn a little bit of Japanese and French. And what interested me
We're having again some troubles with the Xia Jia's connection, and we had a question from Francesco. Hi, Francesco. About the neologisms. There it is. How does language relate to neologism? Is your language flexible to include the future technologies, or is it more related to the past? That's a very interesting question. At least in Quechua, when we have to talk about technology, we use words from mainly from Spanish, not even for English, but for Spanish, because we talk a foreign language. Spanish is a foreign language for us. And what about your languages?
I mean, the same thing happens with Nahuatl, so that modern dialects of Nahuatl usually use the Spanish word. But obviously this issue with Spanish itself, like Mexican Spanish, will often use like English terms for certain types of technology and, adapt them in some way, which is, something you also see in like South Korea, differently from North Korea, where they'll try to come up with like a Korean word. And South Korea tends to be a lot happier just taking the English word and using it pretty much unchanged. I think that because English is like a lingua franca of technology and things like that, I suspect that's a tendency in a lot of places. And, in Spain and in France and other countries, there's an attempt by more conservative elements of the language community, the linguistic community, the literary community, to put the brakes on that and force the language into neologisms that are derived from existing words in those languages. But it's really tough to police that kind of thing, because language does what it wants to do, and speakers are going to talk about new technologies in a way that's comfortable to them. And since so many people are multilingual in this world, that often just means borrowing a word from another language. And there's nothing particularly new about that, because Nahuatl itself is full of words that were borrowed from other languages, as the Nahuatl peoples came out of the northwestern part of Mexico into the central basin of Mexico, where they established themselves around those lakes that are now gone. That's now just Mexico City, basically. They borrowed languages from all sorts of places, and their language simplified and evolved and became something different by the time they settled there around the year 1000 in the Common Era. So, I think that's going to continue to be the case.
Great. Thanks, David. Malka, what do you think?
I think it's true. This is such an interesting thing. And we know of some languages or countries that, like, France has actively really tried to police foreign words coming in. And in Iceland as well, they have like a whole committee to come up with Icelandic derived words for new technologies. So like, television becomes like magic box, but in Icelandic. And it's really interesting because, as David said, languages always have loan words, and it's a really important and fascinating part of how languages grow. So there's this sort of line between exchange and loans and, new ideas and new words coming in. And on the other hand, a linguistic hierarchy, because of course, we're now in a situation where we have these mass technologies that can spread words in certain languages, because these technologies exist and because they have, there's okay, I'm just gonna use the terminology, but there's like capital accumulation, soft capital accumulation, and hard capital accumulation in certain areas and certain languages, and also, gatekeepers that prioritize certain languages. And so you have some languages being used more in movies, on the internet. This can really speed the influence of language hierarchy and this kind of new colonialism that we have. So there's this weird line between, you don't want to try to freeze a language in its current form and prevent all new stuff, because that A, doesn't work, and B, it's kind of stagnant. But on the other hand, you do want to protect what you have. But then I also just want to add, from the perspective of English, because, as problematic as it is today in these hierarchies, English is also a really fascinating language in terms of loan words. It is kind of a hybrid language between two different sort of linguistic streams, and which is why we have such messed up spelling, among other reasons, probably. But and it's interesting to look at some of the words we have for technology, because a lot of them are not actually comprehensible to, originally, if you said to an English speaker who had never heard the word before, television, those two parts of the word would not necessarily make sense to the person. A lot of our neologisms actually hark back to Latin or sometimes Greek, and that's because of this kind of other soft power of this classical ideals and so on, that with the soft cultural the cultural influence of this idea that these things were superior in whatever way, or that they sound better because they're higher class in some way. And so we had that older kind of linguistic hierarchy that has influenced and continues to influence the way our language evolves today. So just to note that some of these words that are English that we are then, propagating in we could say unfair ways throughout the world are not actually English and come from this other tradition of prioritizing certain languages over others.
Great. And what about Guarani, Eliana? Does it relate with neologisms?
Well, here actually the issue we have is, well, it's not an issue actually, it's just a funny thing. We borrow a lot of things from English too. So like we make verbs from stuff like whatsappear is to send a WhatsApp. And like advertising is grabbing a lot of, like, it's been a tendency for the last, 5 to 10 years that they use a lot of English words to sound, I don't know what they're trying to sound cool or whatever. English is simpler, faster. I don't know what's the deal with that. So it's actually like we translate them into our language or pronounce them in Spanish, like shopping instead of shopping, or shopping or shopping. So it's more like it's coming from English than the other way around, because we already have the influence between Guarani and Spanish, and it's been around forever. So it's now, like I said, we're mostly trilingual here sometimes, because we get this influence from English as well. I was going to mention, there was a story from Malka that I was trying to translate once, because I promised her I would someday. And the word beam was bothering me so much because I didn't know how to translate it in Spanish, and I couldn't find, the people who translate know this, like how hard it is to get the exact meaning of something into the other without losing something or without changing it too much, but for it to be accurate. And beam was such a hard word for me to translate to Spanish because it wasn't radio, it wasn't like all the alternatives that I found weren't the exact same things. And I find that in sci-fi and fantasy most of the times, it's really hard for me to find, like I have to come up with a word sometimes. And like kudos to those people who write for games and translate games, because like, I don't know, World of Warcraft, for example, like the translations for their names, I really don't like them in Spanish, and I think they do a good job, I guess. But it's like, how on earth do you translate like Nethervoid or things like that are just so specific to English and that you're used to reading in sci-fi and fantasy that are super hard to you have to come up with a word basically. So that is what usually happens to me.
That's great. That's very interesting to talk about the Spanishization of some English language. Here we have the word Watchmen. That is the Spanishization for Watchmen, the vigilante. So we talk the Watchmen. So
I just want to say,
oh, sorry.
If I can just comment, I think if I'm right about the story that you're talking about, Eliana, I think that's the beam is kind of like a sideways reference to Star Trek, right? So maybe so there's this other thing of how we have, science fiction, either neologisms or sort of changes in the way words are used that then propagate in these weird ways through referential texts. And I don't know how they translate that in the original Star Trek episodes in Spanish. Maybe that'll help. But it's also like a pun in the story. So I'm sorry, translation is so hard. I appreciate what you're doing with my story. Thank you.
So, Xia Jia, I wanted to know how does Chinese language relate to neologism? Or your mic is off. No, I think your microphone is not working. Oh yeah, and so Uwe, what about German? What about German and neologisms?
Yeah, especially about incorporating words from English. That's a very interesting topic because what I just heard is about English terms, for example, used in advertising, and because it sounds like modern, which is again something about time and future, right? So the advertisements are made in English because they are a promise of a better future. Well, if you buy that specific product, of course. And in German, we have also a trend to incorporate new German words, so to come up with new German words and just not use the English words, especially in alternate history settings. Not sure if you know about that, but Germany is like a hotspot for alternate history because of, you know, the Second World War and so on. So there are really many alternate history stories, and some of them have the focus on like you know, scientific language before the Second World War was mainly German. So around the time First World War and so on was mainly German, but now scientific language is mostly English, and that's probably a result of the Second World War. So if you just think that maybe the Third Reich would never have existed, probably this would have changed the use of language in parts of the world, at least of the Western world. And due to this fact, you really can read this difference in different works. Like they're more in that story. Is it more in an English or American world? Yeah, more influenced by the Western world, or more Central European or even German. But one thing is very interesting. There's still no novel, at least I'm not aware of one, where an Eastern culture or language would gain large influence on Central Europe or German. So there's no novel about what if China would rule the world and everyone in Western Europe now would speak Chinese. That's quite interesting. I'm curious if someone would write that.
Wow, that's very interesting. And what about your work? Have you ever made up a neologism? Have you ever created some words to refer to a thing you have created? Well, myself, I have a few terms that like to refer to drogas auditivas, for example, not a drug that you can hear, and you can get high by listening. And I got very inspired for a Clockwork Orange, that is plenty of neologisms and created artificial words for dialect from the Amazon jungle here in Peru. And what about you? Have you ever made up new words?
Well, I think the hugest number of new words I came up with was in my first novel, which is called Symbiosis. So Symbiose in German, which is a biopunk novel. And there are many bio tools, so genetically modified animals with microcomputers inside. So there were spam doves, yeah, spam tauben, spam doves. There were so now Klokröte, which is a toilet. Don't know the English word. So an animal you shit into, yeah. So and there was also there were many animals which I made up, and of course I made up all the names. Yeah, toilet toad. Thanks, Rob. Toilet toad. Yeah, and that's probably one of the most interesting thing also to see what the readers made. So how the readers got used to it. Because still, sometimes if I go to conventions, somebody tells me, you are the guy with the spam doves, aren't you? So.
So yeah. What about you, David?
Yeah, I was going to say, for my science fiction series, The Path, I actually created 3 languages. One of them is just future Spanish, I guess you could call it, but it's Calo, and I just projected 700 years in the future certain tendencies of semantics and phonology and so forth. But the other 2, one of them is an alien language, so it's completely constructed. But the main language that's used a lot throughout the 4 books is Bariogo, and Bariogo coming from barrio, and then the Japanese termination go for language, is a blend of mainly some certain African languages, mainly Swahili, certain Asian languages, mainly Korean, but also some Japanese, and then some indigenous languages, mainly Nahuatl and Spanish. And one of the things that that creating that kind of blended language, the idea is that this Creole evolved in the asteroid belt when people from these different communities were brought there by massive corporations and made work together, and then it's been carried out to other planets. One of the things I was able to do was, in constructing their society, I was able to name things that don't have names in English. So an important part of the society on the main planet in the first book, the main planet being Jitsu, is the existence of non-binary / two-spirit people that are called Omedeyo. Omedeyo coming from the Nahuatl Ometetl, which literally means two God or two spirit or two divinity. And so, since in a family relationship, a parent could be a man or a woman or an Omedeyo, I came up with a bunch of relationship terms so that a child, would call their father Apa, their mother Uma, and if their parent was non-binary or two-spirit, they'd call him Eba. And so just being able to create words for relationships that exist in our world, but that we don't necessarily have names for, was a lot of fun. It's one of the cool things, one of the rewarding things about that, is being able to project the kind of gender equality and sexual equality into the future that one wishes for in the present, and give names to things and normalize it. The more there are terms for things that are used every day, the more normalized it becomes. And so that was a great part of constructing a language.
Great. What about you, Malka? Have you ever created a word? Oh, I think your microphone's off.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I create words in real life too. I think there's, coining words is kind of this game that it's one of the sort of social media games that we play to try and catch that zeitgeist wave, right? So I came up with Corona lag at the beginning of the lockdown because I was in a different place from most of the people I was virtually in contact with, and I felt so asynchronous. I felt so the things that I was seeing online were so different from the things I saw at my window. And then it's so I think that this is a thing where we're in our world, we're thinking a lot about new experiences on the one hand, and how we can describe those in pithy ways, and we're also looking at virality, that things go viral online, and that's something to sort of aim for certain reasons. And so we want to have the ways of describing things. And so I think it's something we do in real life all the time. Or someone will say there should be a word for X experience, and then people will try to come up with it. But yeah, also, I do it in my book. Francesco's reminding me that infomocracy is potentially a new word. I I don't know, other people I think have used it maybe. And, you know, fun fact, I initially wrote it as informocracy. And my editor was like, no one's going to pronounce the R anyway, / which kind of makes sense. So yeah, I mean, that's another example too of kind of putting together different roots of words into a word that people will understand in English, even though the different pieces are not, you know, technically English. Or one of the different pieces isn't. So yeah, I mean, I make up new words a lot. I think it's fun, and it's also this kind of, you know, it's this kind of challenge of you're making up something new and you want it to be something that people will immediately grasp. So it has to be connected enough. I mean, which is kind of the whole game of science fiction, right? You want it to be connected enough that people get it, but different enough so that it gives them that twist, that different view, that the little bit of insight. So yeah, just playing with language like that is so much fun.
Thanks. That's very interesting. I'm loving this conversation. Eliana, what about you? Have you made new words?
I don't usually make up words, but what I do is give them different meanings. Like, I remember I started writing, never finished it, a short story where Tata was like the, it was like their culture, but Tata is actually just a fire, because there's like these traditional games. Like I don't even know where this come from, because it's technically San Juan, which is not from the Guarani, but for us it's like traditional food day and everything is in Guarani, like all the foods, where like they play soccer with a ball and fire, and they also light up the horns of a dead cow. Obviously, someone asked. I told someone once that they thought it was a live cow. It's not alive. It's a dead cow. They light up the horns and they chase people around. So what I do is I give them different meanings. Like that was a culture where they did a lot of things with fire, obviously, but it's just fire for them, you know. And like Nyanduti, for example, is also it's a legend, and it's also like this kind of weaving that they do here. That actually did come from Spain, but like it's ours now, the way we do it here. And I tried to combine that with like a school for weaving. So it's just giving them different meanings to those words. Although I did try to figure out if I could use Nyanduti, because the Enye was bothering me because it was in English, but I ended up using just Nyanduti.
Great, thanks. I love that brief moment of silence before explaining a new word. we search for the concept on our head. We hear very often how science, economics, and politics change language, right? But I was curious. Do you think this can happen the other way around? Can language help change science or economics as well? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to reference The West Wing here, which obviously was an influence on my work. But there's this one episode where they're talking about the like catchy names that get appended to certain political or economic concepts and bills about them. Like I think in the show, the episode is about the death tax, right? And how, and we are seeing, I mean, if you look at the thing that's happening in the United States right now with critical race theory, like people just find these phrases and they make them either appealing or scary, or they append phrases to things that exist to make those things seem like something that they're not, or kind of push up. So, and that is definitely in our countries all around the world, you know, really influencing the way that people vote and activate and urge different things to happen and what they believe. And you know, this is why we need information. This is why we really need, you know, our media and our information sources to be really looking at the way that we describe things, and not just grabbing the words that are used, but making sure that they're accurate as we can get. I'm not going to say neutral because there is no neutral, but like there's this big gap between, you know, as somewhat accurate, and maybe it's a little to one side, and totally absolutely wrong about what we're talking about, totally misrepresents it. So yeah, I think we see all the time how language and words definitely affect decisions that are made in the political sphere. And gosh, I mean, if you want to look at economics, and then the things that are that the original words were okay, but people just totally take them in a different way to mean something else. Like survival of the fittest is definitely not what most people interpret it to mean. And the free market is definitely not, like, the original concept is not the way it's so often used. And so yeah, these words matter, and the way that connotations are attached to words and phrases also really matters.
I actually find that I need words. Like I want people to come up with words to be more specific about certain things, like especially in the political spectrum, because it's like left, right, and I mean there's so much in between and so many different ways to like disassociate the right from certain ideas, and the left from certain ideas. And I need new words. I want people to come up with different ways to be more specific about what you're trying to push, I guess.
Great. We were talking about Star Trek a few moments ago. Maybe you have some opinion on that, because in Star Trek there are so many concepts that originated in the series. But what about you, David and Uwe? Have you an opinion on this? We had some question. Oh, sorry, Uwe.
Not sure. This question was to David or to me. Not sure. And we are running out of time, right?
Oh, I don't know. I think we have just minutes left. We have a question from Rob about future and not future language, and the mindset. How do you conceive the present? Is the present? That's the question. Chen says that speakers of non-future language, for example Chinese, identify the future and the present as being closer or being the same. Well, if I had to speak from the Quechua perspective, well, not just the future, but as I said before, the space and time. So Pacha means earth, but also means a moment. And yeah, they live thinking about the present. They know the ancient Incas doesn't bother too much about the future, because all their language was based in the actual relationships between them. And that's a very interesting thing, because we have the future, and we have this obsession with future, and I think it's causing us a little bit of anxiety for what's to come. I wanted to know, in the case of Guarani or on Mexican indigenous language, how's the relationship with future?
Well, I mean, there's a clear, I mean, in Nahuatl there's a future tense. There's a clear understanding. I mean, I think we have to be really, really careful about saying that this almost kind of what's his name? What's the name of the linguist who postulated that that the way we conceive the world and like that our understanding of the universe is based on our language only? Oh my God. Malka, help me out. Somebody, do you know who I'm talking about, right? Isn't it Benjamin? Somebody, I can't remember. Leave it to me to like forget right now. But basically, what I'm trying to say is, I think it's really dangerous to say that a language that doesn't have a future tense can't conceive of the future. I think that most societies have, that's right, the Sapir-Whorf notion that people divide up and understand the world based on their language only, rather than there being like basic understandings of the world that underlie language and that are projected into language. And so I would say, yeah, we understand that the future exists, and we always have. It's like silly, in my mind, it's silly to postulate something different. Like we might have slightly different ways of thinking about it, but ultimately the future exists for everybody. There are words for prophecy, and prophecy has been an important part of human religions for thousands of years. We understand that we can talk about the future, about things that are to come. And so, I would caution us against that. I put in our private chat, and when I think about the questions being asked on the title of this panel, my answer is no, it's not a Western concept. The future is a human concept. We understand the future because we're able to think beyond the present differently than any other creature on this planet. We are able to sit around and bite our nails and worry and be consumed by what's going to happen tomorrow or down the road. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that most defines us as a species, is our ability to hope and dream about the future. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I don't mean to insult anybody, but I think it's silly to even conjecture that there is a society on this earth that doesn't think about the future, or that thinks about it in a way that's markedly different from the rest of humanity. I think we all pretty much think about the future broadly in the same way, and we worry about the future, even if that future feels more immediate to some societies than other. And I would argue that immediacy has more to do with their level of technological development and so forth than it does with the language that they use. But that's just my view on it.
Thanks. So what about you, Malka? What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that this is it's such a tricky thing, because I think these big generalizations like this are usually quite dangerous. And we can say that there are differences in the way that languages approach things or conceive of things. And I do think that those differences, the ones we grow up with, do affect how we think. Because as I said, for me, it's been a really powerful experience to learn to think in other languages and see what that tells me about my own. But I also think that it's a big step from there to say that, all languages with certain characteristics lead to thinking in certain ways. And it's very dangerous to characterize certain populations as all thinking in certain ways. And so I prefer to stay away from things that general, and really instead look at the nuances. Yeah, I mean, as David said, we all think about the future. Do we think about it in slightly different ways? Yeah, maybe. But to try to characterize those ways, it's so hard. And I think you see a lot of variation within language groups.
Yeah. Uwe, you were talking minutes ago before about the relationship between German and future tense. Maybe you can elaborate more on that subject.
Yeah, I would like to point out that in terms of, well, if you have a story, a science fiction story, a future fiction story, which is written in past tense most of the time, so the language and the tense is not what locates this story in the timeline. It's the plot, it's the behavior of people, it's maybe even the technology, it's the world, how the world looks. And so we need our minds to, in our fantasy, to create this potential future world. And in which manner we describe it, if you write about it, is another thing. And it's not necessarily more important. That's why what was just said is that in any language you can think about the future, talk about the future, and I think it's extremely important to do that. And even more, it's extremely important to hear those non-Western ideas about the future, to read about it. Because what we all also know is that English science fiction is, in terms of volume, overwhelming on the whole world, in cinemas, on streaming TV, and also in novels. And I'm very much more interested in science fiction, so in future stories, in stories about the future, which are not written in this probably quite Western, quite limited perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Uwe. Xia Jia, are you with us?
Yes.
Are you connected? Okay.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Because seems like I have lost most of the discussion, but I still want to add some more information to some earlier discussion. One thing is about like creating new words, because I think in Chinese, maybe as well as in many other languages, like Chinese people are very used to like using English terms in their everyday conversations. Sometimes just for convenience. For example, we can call in Chinese iPad is called 平板电脑, which like 4 syllables. So it's more convenient to call just like an iPad. And one interesting thing is that right now I'm writing on like science fiction fix-up entitled Chinese Encyclopedia, which are a series of short stories using sharing word building, which is set up in the near future China, and I created a series of near future technologies and try to imagine that how these technologies would influence normal Chinese people's life. And so the problem is that how can I get the names of that new technologies? So the very first initial schedule is that I just follow the iPad products that use this I and to add another word to follow that I. For example, I imagine there's like a technology called iCloud. So it's really like this. The iCloud we already familiar with, but that iCloud in my story it's some like a physical cloud, which means that you can touch it, you can see it, and it can change the shape and color and communicate with the users. And I also created a lot of like similar products like iWars, iWatch, iBot, iRobot, etc. But later, when I discussed about this name strategy with Ken Liu, because he promised to translate my stories into English after I finished all of these stories, he criticized my schedule, my strategy of naming these products. He said that one thing is that if you name these products as I something, the readers, especially the English readers, would have the image that the Chinese people never create something new. They just use the concept of like iPod, this thing to name their own products. So that's not very good. So you should try to invent some new words for your products. So I really considered about that for a while, and at the end I decided to change the name into Ling something, which is LING in capital words, with for example Ling Cloud. So because Ling in Chinese means something like spirit or smart, and Chinese people say like 万物有灵, which means like everything in the world has its own spirits, and you can find a way to communicate with that. So I think maybe that's a better idea to give names of like these Chinese products, and which also give my idea that I want to imagine that in that near future world, the users can find the ways to really to use these products in a proper way, not just as technological tools, but use this like the partners, or use this technology to build up new relationships. So I think that's something about like creating new worlds. And back to the future idea, I think there's a similar thing in this thing, that because as I mentioned, in 1902, a very smart Chinese intellectual published the work to imagine Chinese future. But if you read that story, you find that just as most of other Chinese intellectuals at that time, they just try to collect all of this information of the present situation of the Western developed countries in 1992, and use this information to build up the imagination of future China. And such ways still exist in contemporary China, and as well as in other not that developed countries, that we imagine about future. It's very difficult to escape from the future imagination already depicted by the let's say American science fiction did in the past century. So I think it's not that important that to think that if the future concept exists or not in certain language or culture, but if there is future, how can we imagine this future? How can this future or that future be different from the future? So I think that's the most important thing, that we can create our future imaginations, right? And that's not that easy, because we always need to realize that what we already borrowed from those existed future imaginations, and how can we try to think different. So that's a big challenge. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Xia Jia. And Eliana, getting back to Rob's question, what are the relationship between Guarani language and the future as a concept?
Guarani has, I think, 5 future concepts, 6 past tense and future. What I don't know exactly is how much of it is this new Guarani that they imposed when they started to try to teach Guarani in schools, because they did do like this whole reform in order for it to be more digestible, so that we could process it through Spanish and give it kind of like this meaning, because it's mostly through suffixes and suffixes that you say it, like it's a past or present. My thing with Guarani, like as Paraguayan literature in general, is very past leaning. There's not a lot looking forward in Paraguayan literature, because I feel that we're still stuck in the past in many ways, as a country, as a people, and in many, many ways. So I'm actually more curious about that. I have no idea how it would be. I'm not speaking specifically of Guarani, but just as a country, as a culture, because like everyone's still stuck on this one writer who was more like successful and famous, and everyone, I feel like there's a trend that people just want to keep trying to see that as literature, or look down at futuristic writing or science fiction or fantasy. I know that it's not only here that science fiction is not considered like a literary genre or something, but that forward thinking about thinking, like looking into the future, is something that I would like to see, actually. And I want to know how it is, because I have no idea how it would be, because I haven't read a lot, or I try to find science fiction works that from Paraguayan authors, and there's really not a lot. So my answer to that is I have no idea, and I hope there's a way like that they do write more, and that I can get to see like what their idea is of the future.
Thank you, Eliana. So, we're almost at the end of our conversation. I must say I had a wonderful time talking with you. It was great, and maybe we could use this last minute to make some final remarks. Something you want to say? What are you working on right now? Where can we find you later? Who wants to jump in?
Yeah, so I mean, my final remark about the panel is, it's been a wonderful panel. I think we all basically agree that while, you know, across humanity we can all envision the future, the way we see our relationship to the future and the way we speculate about it is, as Eliana was just saying, you know, deeply connected to our own culture and the present and the past, and the way we conceive of the present and the past as either being projected in the future or erased by the future. I mean, and those are like serious, like important questions that matter a lot. And, you know, the global erasure of cultures from the global south, for example, is one of the things that we've got to be careful about. But yeah, so I am going to be continuing with the speculative writing that I'm doing. I have, you know, speaking of speculating kind of like sideways, I have this graphic novel series that's going to be launching in October called Clockwork Curandera, which is like a steampunk reimagining of northern Mexico and southern Texas, where steampunk technology and indigenous magic coexist. And I play a lot with language and futurism in that series. So yeah, on the speculative front, that and the ongoing books in the quartet, The Path, are still coming.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, maybe so. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for having me, and having all those wonderful people from all the world, and also in the chat from even more places of the world. And I think that's one thing we all again learned here. The future is everywhere in the world. It might differ, but we all have a future, and we need to shape it. Thank you.
Thanks. Malka, please.
First of all, just thank you so much, because this has been such a fascinating panel to listen to, the co-panelists. It's been just fantastic hearing all of your perspectives, and especially big thanks to César for such wonderful moderation. And I think that, you know, we've all been talking so much about how language is just a very important part of what we do in envisioning different worlds in the future, and how wonderful it is to do it intentionally and really think about, you know, not just the words that we choose, but also the way language is used and how language changes, and the other possible languages that our characters might speak and understand. And for me, you know, I'm writing a ton of short stories that are coming out. I'm also, you can look for season 2 of the Realm Orphan Black show coming out soon, in which I get Tatiana Maslany to say "come mierda" as part of my campaign to make this part of global language everywhere. And I should have more news about new stuff also soon. So follow me on Twitter and pay attention, because there's more coming.
So thank you. Xia Jia, your final remark, please.
So I'm so happy to be here to mostly listen to other participants' discussion, but I learned a lot about languages and cultural differences, and I'm really curious about the future imaginations in your own works. So I'm looking forward to read your stories in maybe Chinese. And I believe that future fiction we will do a lot to help authors from different languages to translate and introduce their works into other languages, and that be the most joyful thing to looking forward. And thanks for the host work, because my network's problem, I just stuck for several times, and sorry for the troublesome. And wish you all have a very nice day and very nice, very happy night.
Thank you. Eliana, you wanted to say something? Okay.
Oh no, I accidentally unmuted myself, but I'll just go ahead and also thank you so much for having me here. It has been a great conversation. I love hearing all of your points of view, especially because we all agree basically on how we see the future and how we deal with it with language. I actually remember that in the upcoming Constelación magazine, there's a story, but it's by an Argentinian author, because Guarani is also spoken in parts of Argentina that used to be Paraguay. In general, because the Guarani were only here, but mostly in the parts that used to be Paraguay. That does actually have a name. The title of the story is in Guarani. So I think it's going to be the first time that there's like a Guarani titled story or that has Guarani words in speculative fiction magazine. So I'm happy about that. So yeah, I'll leave the link to Constelación magazine if you don't know it yet. We're behind on our issues, but we're getting them all out and working on them and finalizing them all.
Yes, thanks. We'll be watching that. Thank you all for building bridges through languages. That's what literature is all about. So I hope you enjoyed this panel to our audience. I know you did. And remember to subscribe to the FutureCon YouTube channel if you so you don't miss any of the other great panels we have planned for you. You can join the conversation later on Discord, and all the information will be on the YouTube description, I think. And finally, you can always subscribe to our newsletter so we can keep in touch. So thank you all once again, and have a great day. Bye bye.
Bye bye. 再见.
Nos vemos. Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
William Gibson once said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." The time has come to draw attention to science fiction stories written all over the planet. Stories made of different languages, colors, shapes, hopes, and beliefs. The future happens everywhere. That's why we are here.